I spent nearly all of the inheritance meant for both my sons to pay off one son's debts, even after promising to split it fairly. Then told my responsible son there was nothing left when he needed help with a medical emergency. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. I transferred the last payment, convinced no one would ask me for an account. The money was gone when they needed it. The words that were kept, however, changed everything. My name's Veronica. I'm 57 years old, and for a long time, I believed that making difficult decisions in silence was a form of love, a grown-up way to protect my children without exposing them to useless arguments. When my mother died and left that modest sum with the usual verbal instruction to help the grandchildren, I felt the weight of interpreting it fell solely on me. There were no clear papers, no percentages, no voice to say exactly how. Just that repeated, almost casual phrase, as if common sense were enough. At that moment, I didn't hesitate. Julian and Tomas were not in the same place in life and never had been. Julian, the eldest, had learned to walk without leaning on anyone. A university degree, a stable job, fixed hours, a life that seemed to sort itself out. Tomas was something else, always on the edge, always about to fall. Debts that accumulated, rushed decisions, calls at odd hours with a strained voice. I lived with that constant feeling that if I didn't do something, everything would explode. So one payment began, then another. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a one-time help to let him breathe. Then came the credit cards, a personal loan, interest that grew like a shadow. Each transfer was an immediate relief and a well-rehearsed excuse. This also benefits Julian. I'd repeat to myself, it keeps his brother afloat. It prevents bigger problems. I never talked to him about it. I never asked him what he thought. I assumed he would understand. I assumed too many things. For months, no one said anything. Tomas would thank me with long messages, promises to get his act together, to change. Julian continued with his distant but present life. Birthdays, brief greetings. That normality that I interpreted as acceptance. The silence reassured me. It told me I was doing the right thing, even though I avoided the topic every time the word inheritance came up in some casual conversation. There were nights when I'd open the account and look at the balance with a strange mixture of pride and fear. Pride for having helped, fear for knowing there wasn't much left. I'd close the app quickly, as if I could postpone any consequences that way. No one had asked me for explanations. No one was owed them. I thought, I'm the mother I know. The day Julian called was an ordinary afternoon. He didn't sound upset, just tired. He told me about an unexpected medical emergency, something not serious, but costly. He asked for minimal help, a short-term loan, nothing more. As he spoke, I was already looking at the account, that low, almost ridiculous number that wasn't even enough to feign generosity. I felt a knot in my stomach before I answered. I don't have any money right now, I said. There was a long pause on the other end. Not an uncomfortable silence, but a different, heavy one. Julian asked what had happened to the inheritance. I tried to dodge the question. I said vague things. I talked about expenses, about unforeseen events. In the end, the truth came out in pieces. That I had helped Tomas. That he needed it more. That it was for the good of everyone. As I spoke, I heard myself justifying my actions with a confidence I didn't feel. The silence that followed was definitive. There was no argument, no reproaches, just that feeling of having crossed an invisible line. We hung up with a proper, almost polite goodbye. I stared at the phone as if expecting it to ring again. It didn't. 2 days later we saw each other at a family meal. Julian arrived with his arm in a sling, tired, more serious than usual. Tomas was there, uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. The conversation was normal at first, but there was something floating in the air, something no one was naming, until someone asked, almost unintentionally, about the money. The inheritance appeared on the table before I could explain myself. I repeated my arguments, that I had acted according to need, that not everything can be divided into equal parts when life isn't even. Then Julian took out his phone. Not with anger, but with a calmness that disarmed me. He showed old messages from me sent after my mother's death. There were my clear, saved words. I had said I would divide the inheritance equally so that neither would feel they were worth less. I didn't remember writing that with such precision, but they were mine. There was no way to deny it. The table froze. No one spoke for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Someone asked why I didn't keep my promise. Tomas looked down. I tried to explain that circumstances change, that promises made without urgency don't always survive reality. No one responded. The silence was an answer in itself. After that night, something began to shift, slowly but constantly. Messages that took longer to arrive, invitations that no longer appeared, opinions that filtered through the rest of the family without my being able to control them. I found myself justifying myself alone, reviewing every decision, looking for a logic that would calm this new discomfort. I helped one believing I was protecting both. That phrase haunted me like a mantra, but every time I repeated it, it sounded less firm, more fragile, as if there was something behind it that I still didn't want to look at. After that family meal, the atmosphere changed without needing words. There was no open fight or slammed door to mark a before and after. It was worse. It was that slow, almost polite shift where everything seems the same on the surface, but no longer occupies the same place. I was still the mother, but something of my moral authority had cracked, and I knew it, even if no one told me directly. Julian stopped writing first. Before, he would send me short messages, practical things, photos of something he had fixed in his apartment, or a random question. Now he would reply, yes, but always later, with measured phrases, without details. I would talk to him as always, pretending nothing had happened, as if time could erase a broken promise. Each of his replies reminded me that it couldn't. Tomas, on the other hand, changed in a different way. At first, he continued to thank me, but no longer with the relief of before. There was something strange in his tone, a mixture of guilt and distance. He'd tell me that everything was paid off now, that he was getting settled, that he didn't want to bother me anymore. It was exactly what I had wanted for years. But now it sounded different, like a closure. I tried to convince myself that it was a phase, that Julian was sensitive because of his health issue, that Tomas needed space to reorganize, that family always exaggerates when it comes to money. I'd repeat that to myself while I tidied the house or prepared meals that no one came to eat. The silence became part of the routine, and I began to measure my days by the number of times the phone rang. There was a moment when I thought about writing Julian something longer, to explain better, to tell him I never wanted to make him feel less, that his stability had deceived me, that I had confused strength with a lack of need. I wrote several messages and deleted them all. None of them sounded right. They all seemed like excuses, and maybe they were. The family also readjusted. Comments that used to come to me directly now came filtered or not at all. I found out from third parties that Julian had paid for his treatment himself, without asking anyone for anything. It hurt more than I expected, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to, because he chose not to count on me. During some after-dinner conversation, I heard a cousin say that money always shows who's who. She didn't look at me, but she said it with that uncomfortable clarity that doesn't need an explicit recipient. I smiled as if it wasn't about me. Inside, something clenched. I started to mentally review every transfer, every decision made, without consulting. I told myself I had acted with practical logic, that helping the one who fails is more urgent than helping the one who succeeds, that if Julian fell, he would get up on his own. I wasn't so sure about Tomas. That idea had been with me for years, and suddenly it didn't seem so noble anymore. One night, I found the messages Julian had shown at the meal again. I never deleted them. I reread them slowly, phrase by phrase. There I was, promising fairness, using words that now seemed naive, so that neither feels they are worth less. I felt ashamed, not because I had helped Tomas, but because I had decided on my own something that wasn't just mine. I thought about calling Julian. I dialed his number and let it ring until it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I hung up before the tone. I realized I didn't know what to say without justifying myself again. And that, deep down, was part of the problem. With Tomas, the relationship became strange. When we saw each other, we talked about practical things, work, the weather. We avoided the topic of money as if it were a fragile object about to break. I noticed his discomfort, that way of not fully looking at me when he said, "Thank you." There was relief, yes, but also isolation, as if he had paid a price he still didn't fully understand. Weeks passed like this, then months. No one complained about anything, and yet I felt I was being judged all the time, not by shouts or reproaches, but by the distance, by that very clear way of setting boundaries without saying them. I realized that silence can also be punitive and that it hurts more when it comes from those one wanted to protect. I began to wonder when I had really made the decision, not on the day of the first payment, but before, when I assumed that Julian would endure more, when I decided that Tomas needed everything, when I transformed an inheritance meant for both into a tool for individual rescue. I told myself I had done it for the good of everyone, but every day that phrase weighed more, as if it didn't quite add up. One afternoon, looking through old papers, I found a note from my mother. It didn't talk about money, just about family. It said that helping isn't always saving, and that sometimes balance is more important than urgency. I didn't remember reading it before. I stood for a long time with that sheet in my hand, thinking about how easy it is to reinterpret words when it's convenient. I knew something else was going to happen, not because there were clear signs, but because that tense calm couldn't last indefinitely. There were decisions that aren't undone by time. Promises that, once broken, leave marks even if no one mentions them again. And I was beginning to understand that the real conflict had not yet fully shown itself. Over the months, I began to notice something that didn't have to do directly with my sons, but with me. It was a different kind of tiredness, not physical but mental, as if I were constantly upholding a version of myself that I no longer fully believed in. The mother who knows, who decides, who carries the difficult burden so that others don't have to. That image began to weigh on me. There were days when I woke up convinced that I had done the right thing. I'd think of Tomas sleeping peacefully, without calls from banks, without that anxiety that had marked his face for years. I'd tell myself that was worth it, that a mother doesn't distribute like an accountant, but like someone who sees where it hurts most. That idea would calm me for a few hours. Then, without warning, the other feeling would return, that of having chosen. Not helped, chosen. I caught myself justifying myself several times in conversations where no one was accusing me. Stray comments, defensive phrases that came out on their own, as if I needed to convince others to avoid facing what I myself was beginning to accept. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was a signal, a message about how I saw each of my sons. And that message had been unequal. I thought a lot about Julian, about how he had always been the one who didn't cause problems, the one who adapted, the one who solved things. I realized that without meaning to, I had built a silent expectation around him, that he could handle more, that he didn't need to be taken care of as much. I never asked myself if that strength also gets tired, if that role of a postponed, responsible person does it weigh on you over the years. I remembered an old scene. When they were kids, Tomas had broken something expensive in the house, and Julian, without anyone asking him to, said he had done it. I punished him anyway, even though I knew the truth. I thought I was teaching him to take responsibility. Today, that scene came back in a different light. Maybe that's where it all started. Maybe I myself reinforced that idea that Julian could absorb more damage without breaking. There was a kind of silent update in my head. I began to see past messages in a different way. The times Julian didn't ask for help, the times Tomas did. I always interpreted that as need versus self-sufficiency, never as trust versus resignation. That difference hit me late, when there wasn't much to repair. I tried to talk to Tomas one afternoon when he came to pick up some things. I asked him how he really felt, not just if everything was paid off. He looked at me strangely, as if not expecting the question. He told me he was grateful, of course, but that he also felt uncomfortable, that he knew Julian had been left out. He didn't say it with reproach, but with shame. That word hung between us. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I believed it, but it wasn't all mine either. I told myself immediately, as if I needed to distribute responsibilities, so as not to carry it all. I noticed another contradiction there. I had decided alone, but now I was trying to dilute the weight of that decision. It didn't sound fair, not even to me. With Julian, contact was minimal. A message on special occasions. Polite replies, nothing more. I wanted to ask him if he still saw me as his mother or just as someone who had failed, but I didn't. I was afraid to hear an answer that would confirm what I already suspected, that I had lost something that can't be bought or inherited. I started to think about control. How much of all this had to do with helping and how much with not being able to stand the idea of Tomas failing. Because if he fell, I felt it was my fault. It wasn't the same with Julian. His success seemed independent of me. I experienced one's failure as a personal threat, the other's as something unlikely. That difference shamed me. I had built a logic where favoritism was disguised as need, where helping one more was justified because the other supposedly didn't need it. But no one had told me that. I had assumed it, and on that assumption, I made an irreversible decision. Some nights I wondered what would have happened if I had gathered them together before. If I had said, I have this. Let's think together. Maybe Julian would have agreed to help his brother more. Maybe not, but at least he would have been part of it. Instead, I left him out, and I understood late. That hurts more than any amount of money. The house became quieter over time, not because no one shouted, but because there were no more spontaneous conversations. Everything seemed measured, as if every word could open something no one wanted to touch. I myself avoided certain memories, certain phrases. The empty bank account was no longer the main symbol. It was those saved messages, that concrete proof that it hadn't been just a practical decision. I realized I had confused urgency with priority, and that in doing so I had taught something without saying it, that one of my sons would always have a safety net and the other expectations. I didn't know if Julian would ever tell me, but I felt he had understood it perfectly. There were days when I thought about asking for forgiveness. Not a conditional forgiveness, not one full of explanations, just to say, I was wrong. But every time I was about to, fear would appear. And if that's not enough? And if the damage is already done? Admitting it out loud would make it definitive. So I remained trapped between justification and belated guilt, convinced at times that I had done what was necessary and at others sure that I had failed at something essential. I didn't know yet how all this was going to end. I only knew that the wound was no longer economic, it was something deeper, and that sooner or later it was going to force us to face it. The final blow didn't come with an argument or a direct complaint. It came in the simplest and harshest way possible. A concrete fact, something that could no longer be reinterpreted. I found out from a relative, almost in passing, that Julian had moved, not to a different neighborhood, but to a different city. A planned, thought-out change, the kind you don't make overnight, a job promotion, more responsibilities, a different pace. No one had told me because, as I understood later, he had explicitly asked not to be told until everything was settled. He didn't want explanations, he didn't want awkward goodbyes. The news left me still, sitting in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, feeling that strange mixture of pride and loss. Pride because Julian had always done well, loss because he was no longer close and because he hadn't even included me in the process of telling me something important about his life. I wrote to him as soon as I found out. A simple message, without reproaches. I wished him luck. I told him I was happy for him. He replied hours later. He thanked me. Nothing more. There were no questions, no invitation to continue talking. I understood then that the boundary was already set, and I hadn't set it. With Tomas, the distance took another form. He didn't come around as much. When he did, it was noticeable that he measured every gesture. He avoided asking for my opinion. He avoided staying for long. He had managed to get his life in order, at least financially, but something about that prioritized dependence had left him in an uncomfortable place. He wasn't completely free, nor was he close, he was proper. And that, in a mother-son relationship, feels like a loss. I try to get them together one more time. A simple meal, no big announcements. Julian said he couldn't, that he was busy with the move. Tomas came, but the empty chair spoke louder than either of us.
I didn't insist.
For the first time, I understood that some absences are not negotiable. That night, after Tomas left, I searched the house as if looking for something I had dropped without realizing it. Old photos, papers, drawers. I came across receipts for the transfers saved out of habit. Each one was an irreversible decision, not just because of the money, but because of what it had communicated without words. I thought about all the times I said it was for the good of everyone. That phrase that used to reassure me now sounded hollow, because the damage was there, visible, external, a son far away, the other close but distant, a family that no longer gave opinions, but also didn't get close. No one ever yelled at me that I was wrong. It wasn't necessary. The escalation wasn't dramatic, it was silent, and for that very reason, harder to reverse. There was no exact moment where asking for forgiveness would solve anything. There was no cathartic scene where everything would be cleared up. There were decisions that had already run their course. I realized that by deciding alone, I didn't just manage money, I managed relationships, and relationships don't just get rearranged later like numbers in an account. They resent, they adjust, sometimes they break without making a sound. The house suddenly felt large, not because of the physical space but because of what was missing. The spontaneous calls, the unannounced visits. That feeling of being part of my son's daily lives. I had wanted to avoid a conflict and ended up creating a deeper one that isn't discussed because there's no energy left to do so. I also understood that helping doesn't always repair. Sometimes it just postpones. Sometimes it creates invisible debts. Tomas had come out of his financial hell? Yes, but now he carried a silent shame. Julian hadn't received help, but he had learned something, that he couldn't count on me when he needed it. And that lesson, once learned, is not unlearned. There were no shouts, no shared tears, just irreversible consequences and an uncomfortable certainty that began to set in with force, that the price of having protected one had been to lose a little of both. The house became a place of transit, even for me. There were days when I'd sit in the living room without turning on the television, just to listen to the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was one loaded with unsaid things, with scenes that weren't going to be repeated. I thought many times about calling Julian and telling him I was sorry, not to ask for anything, just to put it on record. But every attempt remained just that, an intention. Over time, I understood that there isn't always a clear closure, that some stories don't end with an honest conversation or an explicit forgiveness. Sometimes they end like this, with distance, with relationships that are redefined without notice. I was still convinced, in some corner of my mind, that I had done what was necessary, but I could no longer ignore what it had cost. Julian settled in his new city and built his life, without including me much. Tomas moved on, more orderly, quieter. I was left in the middle of that uncomfortable paradox. I helped one believing I was protecting both, and ended up alone. Not because they abandoned me, but because something broke and no one knew how or wanted to put it back together. Sometimes I reread those old messages, not to punish myself, but to remember that words also commit, that not everything can be justified later, that what is fair doesn't always coincide with what is urgent, and that failing the one who complies also leaves marks. I don't know if I would do it differently again. I want to believe I would, but the truth is I'm not sure. I only know that the decisions we make for others, without others, often come at a higher price than we imagine. And that's the question that accompanies me now. When no one asks anything of me and I have nothing left to decide, did I do what I thought was necessary? And what if what was fair was something different? Story 2. I divided my son's company among his siblings. Now I live with regret and in bankruptcy. Do I really deserve this? Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. I never thought my family would break apart at a dinner. But here I am, looking at an empty table and remembering the exact moment I lost my son. It all started like any other night. My wife cooked her famous stew. The twins arrived with their partners. David with his pregnant wife and Leah with her somewhat quiet fiancé. Alex was the last to arrive. He always is, and always the most punctual to leave. The table was set, the laughs were forced, the toasts rehearsed. There was an invisible tension nobody wanted to touch. Until I did. I cleared my throat. I held my glass high and let out the words I'd been repeating in front of the mirror for days. I want to announce something. A decision I made for everyone's sake. Glances were exchanged. My wife gave me a slight nod. Alex didn't even move. I've decided to divide the company among you. 25% for each of you. I'll keep the other 25% as long as I live. Silence. David and Leah looked at me surprised. Then they smiled nervously, grateful. Mariana took David's hand. Lee's fiancé nodded in approval. My wife sat up straight in her chair, as if she'd just lifted a weight, and then Alex left his knife on the plate with a dull thud. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. What did you say? What you heard, son. I tried to keep my voice steady. I want the company to belong to the three of you. It's fair. It belongs to the family. Fair. He repeated as if testing the word for the first time. Fair that you give them a part of something they didn't build. They're your siblings, Alex, my wife said. As if that were enough. They're my siblings when it's convenient, he replied. But when I slept alone, while they made fun of me, nobody said anything. When I built that company, none of you were there. Alex, enough. Leah intervened. It's not the time for reproaches. It's not the time. Then when? Raising his voice, his gaze burned. When they take the last thing I have left, when they destroy the only thing I did for myself, without anyone's help. David stood up. Mariana tensed up. Lee's fiancé tried to calm her down. I also stood up. Alex, enough, I said with more strength than I had. This is a decision made by your mother and me. We're doing it for the good of the family. He laughed. A hollow, bitter laugh. Then consider me out of the family. He took his jacket, pushed his chair back, and walked toward the door. Right before leaving, he stopped and looked at me. You made a mistake, Dad. You've just destroyed the only thing that worked. And he left. My other kids tried to continue the dinner. They told me it was an overreaction, that he'd get over it, but I knew. I knew right then that nothing would ever be the same. Maybe I should tell you how we got to this disaster, because if there was one part one never saw coming, it was how much Alex had learned to live without us. And the worst part, that we'd trained him for it. Since they were kids, David and Leah were inseparable. They did everything together. There was a natural energy between them, as if they shared a secret code. Alex, on the other hand, was always one step behind. Not for lack of love, but for lack of attention. He was calmer, quieter, more observant. While the twins asked for toys, yelled, broke things, and exhausted us with their energy, Alex played alone. He built models with empty boxes, created label systems to organize his things. We bought him the same electric train as David, but he turned it into a railway network simulation. At 10, he had a spreadsheet, literally for his birthday money. And still, at family gatherings, people always asked about the twins. I tried to make them get along. I'd tell them they were siblings, that they had to include him, but they always found a way to leave him out. Sometimes it was a laugh in his absence. Others, a little you don't understand when Alex wanted to share his opinion. At 14, he stopped trying. At 16, he asked me to talk alone. I remember perfectly. It was a Sunday night. I was watching TV when he sat next to me with a notebook. Dad, I want to do something. Start a business. I thought it was just another teenage idea, a school project, but no. He showed me a sheet with numbers, projections, budgets. He explained how he'd saved since he was 12, selling things online, doing chores for tips, saving half his allowance. He had more financial discipline than me. Are you sure? I asked him. Yes. I've already found suppliers. I just need your support if something goes wrong. And that's what I did. I gave him a half-hearted blessing, an unenthusiastic authorization. He didn't ask for more. 6 months later, he showed me results. A small business, yes, but with steady income. He did everything from his room, purchases, design, customer service. I saw him work until dawn more than once. I'm not going to college, he told me when he turned 17. No. Now I'm growing faster here. That part hurt me, but it also relieved me. I had 2 kids in private colleges, and if I'm honest, part of me breathed easier thinking that one wouldn't be another debt. He was the one who proposed registering the company, but because of his age it had to be in an adult's name. He asked me to use my name. I accepted. I didn't think about what it meant. It was just a formality, right? After that, everything went up. Alex enrolled in a night technical degree to complement his knowledge and kept running the business as if he had 10 employees. When he started leaving me money as a thank you for using my name, I almost fell out of my chair. I accepted. Sure, that money helped pay tuitions, overdue bills, house repairs. Little by little I got involved, at first out of curiosity, then out of convenience, and without realizing it I became part of the machine. I started going to meetings to understand how it was run, and discovered that Alex wasn't just brilliant, he was meticulous, obsessive, and extraordinarily independent. At 20, he already had employees, big clients, and a recognized brand in the sector. And still he kept eating alone in his room. Today I understand. It's not that he didn't want company, it's that he learned not to need it. And there I was, believing all that belonged to me just because my name was on the paperwork, as if signing a document made someone else's sacrifice mine. That was what I never knew how to see. That while my other kids were barely starting to understand what they wanted in life, Alex had already given his all to build one. And just when it seemed everything was stable, they came back. It was a call from David. He told me they'd both come visit us, that it had been a while since we all saw each other together. He seemed enthusiastic. I felt it was a good sign. It had been over a year since the last time the three siblings shared the same roof. David arrived first with his wife Mariana, already 6 months pregnant. Leah arrived shortly after, accompanied by her fiancé, Matthias. They brought bottles of wine, gifts for their mother, baby photos on their phones. Everything seemed perfect, but beneath the smiles and hugs there was something that didn't add up. They waited until after dinner to talk, as if they were looking for the right moment. "Dad," David said with a measured voice. "We need your help." I looked at him. Mariana looked down. Leah crossed her arms. "Things aren't going well," he continued. "My job is taking a nosedive. They cut our hours. I'm looking for something else, but with a baby so close." "And me too," Leah interrupted. "2 of my contracts were canceled." And Matthias looked at him for support. "Well, he's doing his thing, but I need something more stable." They didn't say the word, but it was implied. "We thought maybe," David said, "we could get more involved in the company. Be a real part of the business. Help you. Help Alex." Alex wasn't present for that conversation. He had left early that night. He was in a meeting with a client. "We want to do things right, Dad," Leah said. "Settle down. We aren't asking for charity, just an opportunity." My first reaction was positive. They were my kids. After all, seeing them looking for stability moved me, but I also felt a knot in my stomach. I knew this wouldn't be easy. I waited for Alex to return. That same night, I looked for him in his office. He was in front of the computer as always, reviewing reports, programming something I didn't fully understand. "Son, got a minute?" He nodded without looking at me. I told him everything, without beating around the bush. He listened to me in silence and then simply said, "No, what do you mean no? I don't want them here. I don't need more people, and much less them. They're your siblings? Aren't they the same ones who made fun of me when I read alone, who laughed when I said I wanted to start a business, who didn't talk to me for years because I didn't go to college like them, and now that everything has fallen apart for them, now they remember me? But this is a family company." "No, Dad," he interrupted me. "It's a company I built."
You put your name on it.
"Yes, but I was the one who did the work. I'm not going to risk it all for an act of nostalgia. They have a family. One is going to be a father, and he's not my son. It's not my responsibility." I didn't know what to say. I felt something break inside me. The following days were a parade of indirect pleas and tensions. Mariana sent me messages. Matthias asked me if there was any update. Leah left me notes. David told me to think about the baby and my wife. She was the most direct. "We can't let Alex decide everything. That company is in your name. It's time to do the right thing. For the family," and that word sounded again like a worn-out echo. Family, I thought I was doing it for everyone, but I was about to take away from one the only thing that truly belonged to him. And still I signed it. I did it on an ordinary morning without drama. A dry, quick signature in a lawyer's office who didn't ask too many questions. There was a cold coffee on the desk, and my wife waited for me outside in the car. There was no ceremony, no reflection, just the weight on my chest and the slight tremor in my hand. I divided the company in 3. 25% for David, 25% for Leah, 25% for Alex. The last quarter I left to myself. As long as I live, I said I wanted to convince myself that it was fair, that it was the right thing to do, that someday Alex would understand. I decided to tell them at a family dinner. I wanted to make it seem like a celebration. We cooked together, put on music, I prepared a few words, something brief. But when the time came, my stomach burned as if I had hot stones inside. Alex arrived on time. He knew nothing. Everyone sat down. Forced smiles contained tension. Me trembling behind my glass. I have something to announce to you. I started. I made an important decision about the company. David and Leah sat up straight.
Mariana smiled at me.
My wife gave me an affirming look. Alex drank water. He didn't suspect a thing. I decided to distribute it. Equally, 25% for each of you, and I'll keep the remaining 25%. It's time for this to belong to the three of you. It was like dropping a knife on the table. Alex raised his head slowly. His eyes went from me to his siblings, and then back to me. It's what's best for everyone, son. My wife intervened. Did you sign it? He asked me. I nodded. Alex stood up. He pushed his chair back forcefully. But he didn't yell. He just spoke with a voice so clear, so contained, that it hurt more than any scream. You didn't consult me, your mother and I, my mother. Was she also a partner in the early hours when I reviewed contracts? She also put up with idiot clients. She put her name on the reputation I built.
Alex.
David yelled. Enough with the drama. No, you enough. He snapped at him with his eyes in flames. You weren't there. None of you were there, and now you come to pick up the crumbs of the banquet you were never invited to. This isn't revenge, Alex. Leah said. It's family. It's justice. Justice. You think it's fair to steal someone else's effort just because you share their blood. Nobody is stealing anything. David yelled.
Oh, no.
Then give me your part. Give it back. Or is it only justice when it's convenient for you? The atmosphere was unbreathable. Mariana hugged her belly. Matthias looked at the floor motionless. My wife stood up tiredly.
Enough, she said.
Alex, your siblings need help. You don't have kids. They do. Stop being selfish. That's when I saw something in Alex break. Not of sadness, of determination. Then count me out, he said. I'm saving myself from this. I don't intend to carry what you destroyed. He turned to me for the last time. I warned you this was going to happen, that you couldn't play with what you don't understand, Alex. I tried to stop him. No, he cut me off. This was your decision. Now live with it. And he left. That night we slept with his bedroom door closed. The next morning he was gone. His desk empty, his planner erased, his key on the dining table. I never heard that door slam, but even today it resonates in my head, as if every word spoken that night bounced over and over against the walls of the silence Alex left when he walked away. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks in which the company wobbled more than we expected. David tried to take charge of operations, but it was like watching someone read a map upside down. Leah took control of finances, and in the first week we delayed 2 critical payments. Clients started to doubt. Some left, others directly asked to speak with Alex, and he was missing. Calls, messages, emails ignored. Until one afternoon coming out of the supermarket, I saw him. He was standing next to a motorcycle reading something on his phone. He looked more relaxed, looser, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. I approached him. Son. I told him with a knot in my throat. He looked at me not with hate, with distance. What do you want?
To talk, listen to you.
See how you're doing.
I'm fine.
Better than ever.
I didn't really know what to say.
I told him we missed him, that the house felt empty, that his mother wouldn't stop asking about him.
No. Thanks, Dad.
The last time we left things on unhappy terms. I asked him to come to dinner one night just to talk. I didn't want more yelling, just to understand each other. After a few seconds of silence, he accepted. That night he arrived last. As always. He barely said hello. He sat at the end of the table by the door. Dinner started with tension disguised as courtesy. Mariana talked about the baby. Leah tried to sound cheerful. Matthias just ate in silence. David didn't even look at him. Alex ate little, without looking up until I broke the ice. Son, it's not going well, and you know it. This isn't the same without you anymore. We need you. He looked up, his eyes empty. I'm no longer part of that. But you can be. My wife intervened. You just have to come back. Help us. Lead again.
Just that.
Alex smiled. A cynical smile. Lead a company that's no longer mine.
You have your 25%, I said.
And the remaining 75% is in the hands of two people who don't even know how to draft a professional email. David hit the table. Enough. You're selfish. You have responsibilities. You left us alone. I didn't leave you. You kicked me out, Alex replied coldly. I didn't ask for this. I built something. You destroyed it. You can't just escape. Leah yelled, standing up. This is also your fault. My fault. For not wanting to be robbed. For not giving my work away. We're family, my wife yelled. Help us get out of this. Alex looked at them one by one. Then he looked at me. There's only one way I'll come back. What's that? I asked. You give me back 100% of the company, all of it.
I decide.
I manage. You guys, if you want, work under my conditions. If not, nothing. That's crazy. David yelled. And leave everything in your hands again.
Les napid.
After how you left, I left because you pushed me. Now you can see the result. The yelling continued until I raised my voice like I hadn't in years. Enough. Everyone went quiet. Alex, I can't do that. The most I can give you is your 25%, and with that you take operational command. That you teach us, that you guide them. He stood up slowly. He looked at me for the last time. Then, you've made your decision. What does that mean? I asked. That I won't come back, that I'll move forward with my company. And by the way, you're weeks away from being left with nothing. Your clients are already signing with me. Leah sprang up like a coil. You're our competition. You're stealing our clients. No, the clients left on their own. Nobody wants to work with a company run by a committee of regrets.
And he left.
Just like that, he only left an icy silence. And a prediction. 2 more months. And Alex, as always, wasn't wrong. In less than 2, the company collapsed. First it was silence, calls stopped coming, then the complaints. Clients who left without even an explanation, just with the classic "we've decided to go another route." The oldest employees started to leave, some without even saying goodbye. We knew where they were going, to that new modern, bright office, where everything worked with the surgical precision Alex perfected over years. One that had no room for us. We tried to survive. David, desperate, offered services with ridiculous discounts. Leah tried to redesign the portfolio, but nobody trusted us anymore. Meetings turned into fights. The office, a graveyard. One day we simply didn't open. The consultancy Alex and I had built, or, at least that's what I thought, ceased to exist. David left with his son to his in-laws' house. Mariana had left him a week earlier, saying she needed stability. Leah, after several nervous breakdowns, ended up alone in the apartment she shared with Matthias. He also left. He left her with a note she didn't want to show me, and me. I went back to work. Not in an office, not as a partner, as an independent consultant doing what I could to pay the rent. I can't retire. Not after having destroyed my biggest source of income. Not after having destroyed my son. Alex never came back. I tried to contact him one last time. I offered him the logo, the name, something we'd created together. I thought that at least would mean something. Only out of nostalgia, he told me. But I don't want charity. I'll buy it from you. How much are you asking? I told him I didn't want money, that I just wanted to maintain a bond. There's none left, Dad, he replied. You broke them all. Leah and David opposed it when they found out. They said if Alex wanted something, he should return what he took from us. Ironies of fate. They talked about justice now. Just like me when I thought I was doing the right thing. And so the logo stayed saved in a folder without value, without history. Today I live with my wife in a small apartment, with no office, no company, no kids nearby. She doesn't say anything to me anymore. She just watches me sometimes as if waiting for me to say something that never comes. Sometimes I walk downtown near Alex's office. I see it from the sidewalk. Sometimes I see him walk out alone with the same confident step he had when he was a teenager and showed me his first spreadsheet.
He sees me.
He greets me with a slight nod, without words, and keeps walking. I just stand there watching him walk away. And every night I sit in front of this window and repeat the same thing to myself. I wanted to save everyone, but I only managed to lose the one who needed me most.